And I want to share with you a few thoughts. We are doing a new series called Till Death Do Us Part. We're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking specifically about marriage. And we're going to be talking about some principles that have really helped Shaylyn and I in our marriage. If you're here today and you're not married, this is not the time to check out. Even if you have been married before or that you're going into your first marriage. How many of you know it's really smart to learn from your mistakes? It's even smarter to learn from somebody else's mistakes. Amen. So we're going to try to do that for you and with you. A little disclaimer here on the front end. We do not have by any means a perfect marriage. We have, I believe, a healthy marriage, but it's not perfect. And some of the things we're going to talk about over the next 4 weeks are things that we did right, and some of it are things that we did wrong. Some of these are things that we've changed and we've gotten pretty good at, and some of these are things we still struggle with, but we're trying to get better and better. And so I want you to know that. I hope that as we're talking today, especially if we say something that rubs up against a conflict or a challenge that you've been having, that we're not up here like we're up on a pedestal and like, oh yeah, they have it perfect, and not even close. But what we did when we committed to this relationship, to this marriage, we set the bar as high as we could. We said, look, we don't want to just stay married. We want to have a great marriage. And when you really look at how God intended for marriage, He intended that marriage would be the closest thing that we have on this earth to understanding the love of God. Think about that. When you stand up in front of people and you say, till death do us part, you're saying, I'll never leave you, I'll never forsake you. Who else do we get that promise from? We get it from God. And so that's the closest thing we have. And yet many times marriages are so challenging and difficult that it doesn't always look like that. And so we want to kind of share some things that we've learned.
Yeah, so one of the things that Greg and I came across that was really just super influential for us that I think is really helpful is we read a book and it talks about how every relationship is in one of three categories. You're either back to back, shoulder to shoulder, or face to face. And this really helped us understand what our goals were. Back to back, it's pretty clear. You're completely facing the opposite direction. You have no interaction with this person. You're not making any attempt to make the relationship better. You're walking in opposite directions. Your spheres of life and influence are in completely separate places and are not interconnected. A lot of these relationships are going to end up in divorce or I don't know if you call it at best or at worst, that you just stay together and have no life, no intimacy in that relationship and no life together. So back to back is obviously the last place we want to be. We've been there at short stints in time where, thankfully we got a few steps apart and then turn and draw, right? And fight it out and work it out and come back together. But that is a way that if that becomes your way of life, it really is the death of the relationship. The second one is shoulder to shoulder. And at first, that kind of seems like it would be a good thing because you're working as a team and you're tackling things in life side by side, but you're really not interacting with the person next to you. You're both just happen to be focused on the same things outside of you. So this is an area where you see a lot of people get caught up in they're raising their kids together and they're tackling financial goals or career goals together, and they maybe are on the same page in some of those things. But you see that a lot of times this is in relationships where 25 years down the road, they split up and everybody goes, what happened? They've been together so long. They seem like they never fought. Well, they really just didn't have anything together. They were tackling the same goals, but they had no relationship there. And you see that once they've climbed those hills together, then there's just nothing left. And they look at each other and realize they don't know one another. So really the goal for us that we went through this and we realized we want to live a life face to face. That's the ultimate goal. Like Greg said, set the bar high. You don't want to just go, well, we died still married. We did it, right? We want it to be great. And so face to face is where we are interconnected, and everything that we do, we're looking to the other person, and we're looking for them for feedback and for inspiration, and we're choosing to do things together, truly interconnected and working as one, which is kind of that next scripture I know that you wanted to bring up a little bit.
Yeah, and the reality is we have probably all three types of marriages in the room right now. And many times when you're back to back, it feels hopeless. And I don't believe it is hopeless. In fact, our biggest prayer today was that you would leave today not feeling hopeless. I'm going to tell you why. All right, here we go. Mark 10, starting in verse 6. We actually looked at Mark 10 last week. And this is actually the very beginning of Mark 10. A group of people trying to zing Jesus with a tough question came and asked him about divorce. We're actually going to talk about that some next week. But Jesus comes back to them, and they basically ask Jesus, tell us about marriage, right? So Jesus says this in verse 6. He says, but God made man, male and female, from the beginning of creation. And this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they're no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. This is the classic picture of a godly, healthy, biblical marriage, and the idea that you're no longer two but you're one. The challenge with that is that you're still two, right? I mean, it sounds good to say, hey, it's no longer two but one. But you're still two. Like, you're still two people. Like, you still bring in your baggage in. She has hers. You have yours. You're still bringing in your different conflict styles. You came from two different families that did family differently. You have different points of view. You have different lives. It's still two people functioning as one. And so we got to be honest about that. We got to be honest about how difficult that is. And so what we want to do is give you some tools, some very, very practical tools to help you to do this. Now, I want to start with this with this paradigm today, and it's this: that relationships succeed or fail based on their ability to adapt and adjust to changing context. Okay? Relationships of any kind, but especially a marriage, will succeed or fail based on the ability to adapt and change and adjust to a changing context. Another way to say this, it's an analogy we're going to work off of. Relationships succeed or fail based on their ability to hit the curveball. All right, now, for you baseball fans out there, you're going to get what I'm saying. For those of you that aren't, just follow me here. In baseball, you have a pitcher, a catcher, and a batter. And the pitcher has the main pitch, which is a fastball. And a fastball, no matter how fast you throw it, it kind of goes in a straight line, and it goes in. And if you throw 100 miles an hour, eventually the batter, if you throw enough 100-mile-an-hour pitches, the batter is going to time it up, is going to hit it. What a great pitcher does, because the pitcher's job is to get the batter out. And so the pitcher adjusts his pitches, and he says, look, I got to have more than a fastball, because a fastball is super consistent. I got to throw a curveball. And what the curveball does is it changes speed, and it changes trajectory and the way that it comes in. And so now the batter, you get the batter out more often because the batter is used to 100 miles an hour and it coming in straight, and all of a sudden here it comes slower and moving in a different way. Curveballs are how you get batters out, and by the way, curveballs are how you get marriages to strike out. Marriages strike out because of curveballs. You got to understand that the context, your context in relationships, will be an ever-changing curveball coming in. And depending on your ability to see the curveball, to adapt to it, and to adjust your expectations, to adjust your approach, will determine whether or not you have an intimate marriage or you go from relationship to relationship, looking to fall in love with someone else who's back in the throwing 100-mile-an-hour fastballs, when eventually life's going to throw you a curveball. It is going to happen. Now, I want to talk about varying context and change in context and what curveballs look like. So go ahead and bring this up. Okay, so your relationship context, if you're married, has changed many, many times. Started out, you were friends. That was one context. You changed and somebody asked somebody out, and now you became official. You were dating. That's a different context. A lot of relationships don't make it through that. Hey, we like being friends, let's go back to that. But you kept moving ahead. Eventually you got engaged. That was a different context. Now we're talking about forever, but we're not there yet, but we said we would, and we got rings and stuff, but we can still take them back to Zales, okay? But it's different. Now we got to actually really decide, do I like your family? Do you like mine? We're going to do this again. Okay. Then once you get married, now you're married. It's legal. It's official. It's official in the eyes of God. And now we have officially made the commitment till death do us part. That's a different context. Completely different. Then from there, you have all these other variables. Career or careers. Okay, you start out in one career. How you spend that 8, 10, 12 hours a day, however long you're in your career, affects you. That's part of your context, whether you come home exhausted or energized or both. Whether you like your job or hate your job, whether you're good at your job, bad at your job. By the way, as you develop skills in your career, it's not just changing your career, it's changing you. You're different. I used to be afraid, hey, if I marry someone, it'd be kind of weird to be married to the same person. How am I going to know if I want to be married to the same person for 50, 60 years? Well, you're not. You're married to a different person. It's ever changing. I'm different. She's different. Like the more you develop as a person, the good, the bad, and the ugly, your context is changing. Your kids are like, so you go from married with no kids to married with a kid. If you're here and you can vouch for me today that bring a kid into the marriage changes it, give me an amen. All right, so I'm not lying today. Now, 2 adds a different dynamic. 3, your prayer life goes to the next level, I'll just tell you, and then beyond. So every single kid is the kid's a curveball, sometimes a knuckleball, sometimes in the dirt, sometimes over the batter's head. Okay, but we're talking, they're different, their personalities are different, they bring different dynamics, okay? It's a change of context. Aging. As you age, different people have different attitudes toward aging. It affects them physiologically. But absolutely, as you age, it's going to affect you, both good and bad. Your losses, how you deal with pain. Losing people that you love changes your context, changes your emotions. Hey, I need something from you I didn't used to need now. I'm struggling in a way I never have before. That's a curveball into your relationship. And you can't expect a fastball. It's not a fastball. You didn't know they were going to die. You didn't know you were going to lose the business. You didn't know that was going to happen. And when it did, if you don't adjust your approach, that thing will strike you out. Promotions, again, successes, physiological changes, financial changes. Oh, come on. Money is one of the number one things that takes down marriages because you're dealing with financial hardship. By the way, more money, more problems. Come on, somebody. That's the truth according to Biggie Smalls. He taught us that. Sometimes you get more problems. It affects your relationship, your standard of living. Okay, and just pressure and how you deal with pressure. All of that is a curveball into your relationship. And depending on how you respond and react and adapt and adjust will decide whether or not you keep getting better in this marriage or if you get struck out. If you don't get what we're going to talk about today and use some of these tools, here's what will happen. You'll either end up in a bad marriage or you'll go fall in love with another 100-mile-an-hour fastball. Yep. And then eventually that 100-mile-an-hour fastball will eventually be another curveball, and then you'll be looking to fall in love with a new 100-mile-an-hour fastball. That's not life. Life throws curveballs. Some of them you bring on yourself. Some of them come at you. We have to get really good. We have to get really good at hitting the curveball. In the last 7 years, talk about some of ours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just going to say for us, as I look at this list that you and I kind of compiled of what the past 7 years have been since we moved here, some of these things we've handled the curveball well, and some of them have really thrown us for a loop at times, and we had to learn how to work through them. In the past 7 years, we had our first child. We had Ella. When we moved here to Columbus, we came here from Toledo. Ella was a little bit younger than Miles, not quite 2 years old. We came here, we both worked multiple jobs. I mean, I was picking up everything I could find off of Craigslist, side job in addition to working at the gym. Greg had 3 different jobs, which brings us to financial challenges. Everything that came along with walking away from a solid, consistent, predictable life in Toledo that we had there to coming here, and everything was a curveball about starting a church. That was something else that we had to learn how to walk through together and navigate. And actually, we'll talk about that a little bit next week too. Money, that's a big one, or 2 weeks, right? Yep. 2 weeks. So don't miss that. But yeah, that was a big one for us. Then we launched the church. The week before we launched the church, we found out we were pregnant with Hudson. Okay, there's a curveball.
That's one way to grow a church, just have babies.
I know. I will never forget the look on his face when I broke that news. That was not in the cards. Yeah, that's a curveball. My parents got divorced right around the time that Hudson was born. They came to the hospital separately. I told Greg I felt like something was really weird going on, and they split up a couple weeks later. That was a curveball for me personally and for our relationship that kind of made us evaluate, okay, what didn't work for them? What are some things that maybe we're repeating, right? It was something we had to take seriously. Family drama, anybody raise your hand? If you know family drama, amen, right? We'll just leave it at that. You all know what that means for you. Staff transitions. I started a business. That was a whole new dynamic for us. We still own our house in Toledo, so now we have to manage that as a rental property because the market up there was not so hot when we moved here. We've moved 3 times in the past 7 years. Then we got pregnant with Miles. The day before Miles was born was the day that we got Hudson's autism diagnosis. That was a pretty intense 48 hours. We bought this building here, right? You guys walked through that with us. That was a big transition. We lost 6 family members in that 7-year period. So those are all things that I'm sure you guys are going through your own Rolodex in your mind of, yeah, some of those things that happened to us or other things that are added to the list. All of those things, if we're not careful, can completely throw us off and separate us.
Yeah, and the thing that happens is until you stop and actually put it on paper, you don't realize what all happened. Have you ever started to do that and you're like, man, we actually have been through a lot. When you're in the moment, if you're not intentional, you just keep plugging away. You just keep going until you stop and write it down and think about it. So what was happening to us is we were getting hit with curveballs, right? Everything from the emotional bandwidth that you need to walk through family pain and a diagnosis and financial stress and all that stuff that comes together. The curveball is coming at you. What we started to do was find that instead of at times getting on the front end and actually looking at it, we were being caught off guard by it, and we would be at each other, we would be irritable, jumping down each other's throats for things, and yet it was because we hadn't stopped to define what was going on. Let me show you a scripture in the book of Luke chapter 14. It says, don't begin, okay, and this is actually, the context of this is talking about a relationship with Jesus, but really it's talking about anything, especially a relationship. Don't begin until you count the cost. For who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Now think for a moment on a principle of budgeting money and a project management. You start out with a budget, but you expect the project in the real world to deviate from the budget. Right? I mean, you sit down, you go, okay, how much is this going to cost? How much time is it going to take? And you plan it out, but then you don't just go, well, I'm sure it'll be perfect. If you ever managed a project or a budget, you know it's a varying thing. There's always something changing. It took longer than we thought. This thing
had to take money from the kitchen to pay for the electrical wiring that was bad, right?
Exactly. You got to hit the curveball because it's always adjusting. So yes, you sit down in your marriage or relationship at the beginning, you try to count the cost. But you got to keep counting the costs. You got to keep stopping, going, wait a second, let's look at this marriage. What is going on? Okay, what's different than it used to be? Define the curveball, okay? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a moment today, and we're going to talk about how to hit the curveball, and it starts by creating some definition. A problem that is undefined is undefeated, okay? If you don't define the problem, you can't defeat the problem. It's like putting on a blindfold and trying to box. It's like trying to hit something you can't see. I got to be able to lock eyes with it. I have to be able to define it. And if I can't define it, I can't defeat it, which means you're going to have to be willing to sit down, especially in a marriage where you have this curveball all the time, constant variables, and talk it out, discuss it. Refuse to be defensive. Stay at it. Sometimes some things are quickly and easily defined. Other things take time. to create definition, okay? Here's how we're gonna talk through hitting the curveball. It's needs, expectations, and resources, all right? So we are, through understanding and discussing our needs and expectations, we're gonna define the curveball. What's different about this pitch versus the fastball? And then once we define the difference within our needs and expectations, now we can take out the bat of resources and hit this thing out of the park, all right? Or at least a solid single, all right? All right, so we're gonna start with this. We're gonna start with the idea of needs, okay? We all have needs. Everyone in this room, we all have needs. Luke 10:27 talks about how God has wired us and that we must give him everything, but it really lays out these 5 areas: your emotions, your emotional, your spiritual, your mental, your relational, and your physical. And in a marriage, as a person, we have certain needs in all 5 of these areas. When our needs aren't being met, we're frustrated. We're frustrated. Now, let me show you. This is a tool that we use in our marriage. We actually use on our staff here at our church. This really works in any relationship. It's what we call the frustration scale. This is how we get to the bottom of fixing frustrations, okay? There's an expectation and there's a performance, and the gap between expectation and performance is what we call frustration. All right, so let's just take it into something not marriage. Your kids. If you expect your kids to get straight A's, that's your expectation, and they get 2 B's, we'll call that frustration. Those 2 B's are frustration. There's a few ways to solve it. 1, they can get straight A's. You won't be frustrated anymore. 2, you can lower your expectation. You know what? 2 B's aren't so bad. We'll go there. Frustration gone. Or we can close the gap and say, you know what? Let's go 1 B, and we meet in the middle, and frustration's taken care of. Well, we have to define it, right? Problem that's undefined is undefeated. When you have unmet needs and unmet expectations, you have to have the courage and the care to sit down and define the problem. The curveball. What's changed? What's changed in our environment? I can't be upset with her because, if she's doing things the same as when we dated, our context is different. It's different. We have to sit down and talk it out. Some of them you can put numbers on, you can put definition on super quickly, right? So you might say, let's say we sit down, Shaylyn's like, Greg, I just feel like you're not home enough. Okay, let's talk about that. What does that mean? Well, I just, in the evenings, you're not home for dinner, and I want us to do dinner as a family. All right, well, then how many nights a week would you like me home for dinner? She says 3. Boom, we just defined it. All right, what time do you want me home? What time's dinner? Dinner's on the table at 6. Okay, so if I'm home 3 nights at 6 o'clock, we just fixed the frustration. It's over, it's done, right? Unless it curves again, and then we're gonna talk, is it 4? Or she's like, you're home too much, bro, how about 2? But we defined it, we put a number on it, okay? And then we can attack it. But then there were some that, as we sat down, because we were both feeling frustrated. Here's what was happening. We were living, frankly, shoulder to shoulder, divide and conquer, 3 kids, careers, all this stuff going on. We were shoulder to shoulder, and we started, because of our frustration, we were becoming kind of petty, and we were fighting a lot, and it wasn't pretty. And so we started a little bit to kind of glance at what it might look like to be back to back. And I didn't like it, and she didn't like it. And we said, hold on. I don't want to go down that road. Let's have some painful conversation. And let's define this problem. Let's stare at this. Let's find what this curveball actually looks like. And so we went through the process of defining our frustrations. I said, I tell you what, you go define your frustration. I'll go define mine. We'll come back, compare notes, and we'll decide, do I need to raise my performance? Do you need to lower your expectation? What are we going to do? We'll one expectation after another, we're going to work through it. And so we did.
Greg, in his logical brain, he went back and 15 minutes later, had this 10 bullet point list for me of this is exactly what I need in each area. And he was like, here you go, paper form. Me, I came back with a blank paper I can't really explain what I just feel.
I mean, when you're married to someone who makes very few mistakes, it's tough sometimes to...
Couldn't come up with a thing.
A lot of blank pages, but so not true. So mine, I was able to put numbers on quickly. She wasn't. But I knew she was frustrated with me. I could feel it. So I pressed her on. I said, come on, tell me, like, where am I frustrating you? And eventually, I'll never forget, she said, you know what, honestly, I don't feel like you cherish me. And that caught me off guard because I felt like I was doing that well. I thought I was nailing it. And I was like, my instinct was to get defensive. I want to go, what are you talking about, cherish you? I said, till death do us part. What are you talking about? I put food on the table, You see how hard I'm working? I'm faithful, I'm good, But I didn't. I backed off and said, okay, let's talk about that. How am I not cherishing you? You're not feeling, bottom line, she wasn't feeling cherished. When it's at a feeling, it's hard to define it, right? A problem undefined is undefeated. So it's hard to go, I'd really like you to cherish me at an 8. And it's like, okay, where am I at now? A 6. How do we close the gap? No clue. Okay, and that's how you just end. And again, I had to fight down the defensive feelings. And so here's what I did. I had a little stroke of genius, many strokes of idiocy, but one stroke and I said to her, listen, tell me a relationship, mutual friends that we have, where he cherishes her, and just think about it. When you see him cherish her, you go, man, honestly, I don't want to say it, but I wish Greg would be more like that. And she was like, she thought for a minute, and then she named a couple that we know. They're from the South. They're about 60 years old. And the guy really is extremely cherishing. Like, he dotes on her. He laughs at all of her jokes, even when they're not funny. Like, he's like, he thinks she hung the moon. He always talks about her in the highest way. And to her, she was like, she saw that and she was like, man, he really cherishes her. I just thought they were Southern. So that's what people do in the South, And I realized I had a blind spot because my father, who is very faithful, committed, he's a great man, but my parents' marriage wasn't like that. So to me, cherishing meant, if you need me, I'll be there. To me, cherishing meant, if you get in an accident, I'll be the first one to the hospital. I'll walk, through. If you're paralyzed from the neck down, you got a husband forever. To me, cherishing meant deep commitment and faithfulness. To her, cherishing meant something else. What I recognized was she had an unmet need. And I realized this, I better learn how to figure it out and fulfill it, because people will find fulfillment for their needs, or they'll live starving. I don't want either one. I don't want her to have to go find someone to cherish her, and I definitely don't want my wife starving. I want to help her out. So what I realize is the same determination I'll have toward getting through a problem at the church or the career or whatever. I'm like, I better have the same determination of figuring out how to make her feel cherished. Like, I can do this. Come on. Like, I can get good at this. I can figure it out. Like, I can study it. I can work at it. Like, humble myself and go for it. And so then I had something to aim at. What we did? We defined it. It wasn't a number we put on it, but it put a picture in my mind and gave me something to begin to shoot for. A problem undefined is undefeated. And if you'll sit down and you'll take the time to look through, what are my needs that are being unmet? What are my expectations? And if two people, this is the thing, guys, there is hope for every marriage, because it's two stinking people. Come on, two people. We live in a world right now where we're trying to get millions of people to see eye to eye, and it feels hopeless. Marriage is not hopeless, it's two people. We can just get two people to act right. Just two people to stop looking at themselves and looking at each other. This isn't fixing all the world's problems. This is fixing in your house, in your relationship. And if we can just two people to be fiercely committed to one another, to say, we're going to hit these curveballs. I'm not going to break up with a curveball to go find a fastball. I'm going to understand this is life. This is depth of relationship. I'm going to work at it to get good at it. Now, part of that was I had to be willing to approach her and say, you know what, show me someone that does this better than me.
Yeah, can I just give a word to the ladies? Well, gents too. Don't be the one that initiates and goes, well, if you could just be more like so-and-so. That's not going to go over well, right? That's a great way to put somebody's defenses up. But he was willing to put himself in a humble position where he said, give me an example. I mean, that blew my mind that he was willing. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but it took me a few minutes. I'm like, I don't know if I want to say that.
Is this a trap?
Yeah. But he really meant that, and I think that's a big deal, being willing to be that open and, like you said, refuse to put your defense up and hear the other person and what they're trying to say. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're
I
good.
thought that was a big point because, that's saying if you could just be more like so-and-so, it's not good to compare for the sake of breaking the other person down. But when you're the one that's open, which I can't even commend him enough for being willing to do that, to being open to that and say, look, give me an example of something that I can follow, you can make a ton of progress that way. That was huge.
One of the things that can be kind of a resource for you in helping you to even define your needs, Dr. Gary Chapman wrote a book called The 5 Love Languages, right? So it's the idea of the language of love. You speak different love languages. And so you have quality time, words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, and acts of service. Some people, have maybe they're dominant in one or two areas, especially if there are some that really don't affect you or are not important to you. You need to communicate that. But the idea of love languages, I love the word language because it's like if you don't understand someone's language, you don't know what they're saying. They could be saying the nicest thing in the world, but it's in another language. I have no idea what you just said. In the same way, I can't communicate with someone love in a way that I want it. I got to do it in the way that she'll hear it. And so you sit down. Now, again, this is part of the curveball because it's a variable, right? Our love languages, depending on our emotional state, depending on the curveball of the season of time, changes. Yours have changed some.
Yeah, absolutely. I mentioned at first service, and I'm sure a lot of moms in here can relate to this. When Greg and I first got married, I always wanted to be hugging him and holding hands, and I was all about physical affection. I got 3 kids hanging off of me all day now. Like I say the words, get your foot out of my eye on a daily basis. Like by the time he gets home at night, maybe I don't really want to be touched anymore. In that moment, that's not as big of a thing to me, but I'll tell you what, you're so hot when you do dishes, baby. Like, it's so good. Acts of service is a bigger one for me in this season of life than it was before.
Hey, I'm telling you, I do some dishes and that physical touch comes back. It's just amazing. It's amazing.
Real quick.
Fellas, you got to hit that curveball. But you got to hit the curveball. All right. So, listen. You got to have a face-to-face conversation. You got to have a face-to-face conversation. Shaylyn, coach us up a little bit on how to have a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg and I have had this conversation over and over again, and it's something that I recommend that you do over and over again too, because with each of those curveballs that come, the answers may be different. We've had this conversation last 15 minutes. We've had this conversation be 8 hours, legit, where we just stayed up all night and watched the sun come up because we had some stuff to work through. So these are really good. And by the way, these will be on One Church social media, so you don't have to try to memorize them right now. You'll be able to look it up and come back to these. The first one is what has changed in our environment. What are some of the curveballs that have been thrown that are surrounding us? Maybe new job, new life situation where you've moved. What around us is different? What has changed in me? This is a big one, like Greg touched on before. We change so much. Don't assume that you're the same person that you were 10 years ago or that your spouse is. What has changed in me that's affecting the way that we relate? What do I need now that I didn't need before? And what do I not need anymore? This is kind of, what we just talked about a little bit, but that's a big one. There are things that maybe at some seasons in your relationship that were a big deal to you that aren't anymore, but now you have different needs and you need to be honest with yourself and honest with your spouse about what those things are. And then the last one is a critical one that I think a lot of us don't really want to ask ourselves most of the time. This is a hard one for me, and it's where do we need help? You can't always get this on your own. There are times where you will talk yourselves in circles and you need to delve into your resources and maybe pull from some people that are a mentor to you or read books, but take the initiative, make it a priority. Where do we need help and where can we get it? Greg, why don't you talk a little bit about those resources?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're butting heads, you have 2 options. We can quit and go the other direction, or we can get some help us to get through this. And I found that pretty much everyone feels a bit ashamed to admit their relationship's not in a good place. I know we felt that. A lot of times people, you want to project that you got it all together, that your life is an Instagram filter all the time when you have challenges, and to finally let your guard down and admit, we're having some serious conflict issues. We're not on the same page. We're shoulder to shoulder, maybe back to back, and we need some help. Best thing you can ever do would be to do that. And I've got news for you. Every single human being that's ever been in a relationship has had this. Okay? You're not alone. You're not alone. It's normal. It doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person. All right? What we're trying to do is give you a roadmap that we learned in the School of Hard Knocks of how to have this conversation. You're going to have the courage to do it. 2 people. She can't do it alone. He can't do it alone. You got to engage and go in. All right? Now, this is how we're going to do it. Or hopefully you're going to do it, is like this. Defining the needs, defining the variables, what's changed, defining expectations, as hard as it might be to admit. And then once we do that, now we actually can see the curveball. We know we defined what's changed. And now we take our bat, which is our resources, and here's how we're going to hit it. All right? So things have changed. Well, no, what needs to change with our time, energy, and money? Yeah, we used to be able to do that thing that took a lot of time because we used to have more bandwidth than we do now. Now I'm emotionally frazzled. My dad had a heart attack, or my parents got divorced, or we just lost another family member. I don't have it in me for you to go be in your 5th fantasy football league. Like, can you take it down to 2? Just 2 would be awesome. We got to define, like, I need more help. I'm not going to need it forever, maybe. Maybe I just need to get through this emotional thing, so I need you to be more available. I need you to be home more. I need you to travel less. Like, we need to just vary it. We need to find out, like, define what are the needs, like what has changed. So once we do that, and we can have an honest conversation, and we've done this. We've had to do this. Like, there were things that we used to do with 1 kid and 2 kids that we can't do now with 3 kids. I was doing more traveling. We started to look and say, look, I was traveling a lot. I was speaking a lot of places and going around. And I'm like, look, I don't want to be one of those idiots who goes around and helps everybody else while my family is back home struggling. Like, no way. So what we did was we said, look, I'm still going to do some traveling, just not as much. We scaled it back. We defined it. We defined the problem. Okay, we're going to do less, and we're going to do some traveling where we go together. Where we do together. We're going to not just divide and conquer, we're going to do more together. And so once we defined it, now we can swing our time at it, we can swing our energy at it, and we can swing our money at it and adjust to hit the curveball, okay? I would encourage you, if you can have a non-defensive, face-to-face conversation with extreme definition, it's going to take a while. Some of it doesn't always come out. Give each other room to say what's on your heart, for it not to be all clean when it comes out, all right? But to give the person some latitude to process their thought, to put it out there. Once you put it out there, I'm telling you, stuff will start clicking. You'll go, I hadn't really thought of it, but boom, and then all of a sudden it becomes clear. Now we can deal with it. We're working together. It'll bring you together, okay? Here's how we're gonna end today. Shaylyn and I want to take a moment, and we want to pray over you and your marriages and your relationships moving forward. I'm going to pray specifically for those of you that are back to back, that God is going to use even some of this teaching and these conversations to start to get you to turn a little bit, all right, even a little bit. But you both, it's just 2 people, have to be willing. Listen, you can do this. You can do this. I believe that there are people that have already begun to talk about or think about divorce. You've already maybe even turned the page in your mind, and that God is going to use this. If you're courageous enough to walk into these conversations, if you're willing enough to do this, to say, you know what, I don't want to take this same flawed thinking and think that a new relationship's going to change it. I'm going to hit the curveball in this marriage. I want to do it this way. I believe God is going to do some miracles in your lives, and to turn you around in areas you thought were hopeless, and to restore to you the joy of the intended relationship that God wanted you to have. He wanted you to have true intimacy, openness, and depth of relationship. The closest thing that you'll ever find to a relationship with God is a relationship with your spouse, but let's do it His way, all right? Let's pray.